You know, deep within probably the hearts of most of us, there's this little, maybe almost unrecognized assumption that the world would be a better place if I were in charge. You know? I mean, you've been in situations, some circumstances, maybe. Well, yeah, maybe I shouldn't say the world, but at least maybe my world would be better if I were in charge and everything went the way I wanted it to. I don't know. I think there are times when all of us kind of have this desire to kind of, well, I'll just say it, to kind of control things and try to make them line up to our own expectations. And it's funny because almost in contrast to that, there's also this inner sense that our words and our actions don't have ultimate consequence. I think this is a growing trend in our time. And how that works out is that we want to be able to do certain things that we know usually result in certain consequences, but to be able to amputate the consequences from the effect. For instance, I want to eat donuts. I haven't said the other part. How do you know it's even funny? I want to eat donuts. I want to lose weight. You see? Now, with that tension and that sense of I want to be able to do what I want to do, but I don't really want my actions or even my words to have the kind of consequences or effects that they would normally have. And so that is when, in many people's minds, God is brought into the equation. And God is led along by a leash and told, God, here is your job. Okay, I've got it all figured out for you. Your job, God, is to interrupt the connection between action and reaction. Your job, God, is to take the consequence of my actions and make them no longer apply, so that I can eat all the donuts I want and I won't gain any weight. And it applies in a lot of other circumstances as well. And really, I was talking to a friend this week about this, and what this does, ultimately, if God did that, it seems like it'd be really, really cool. I mean, doesn't it? You're guarded because you know I'm setting up something for you here. But no, it seems like it'd be really cool. But if God did that, if God severed the connection between my actions, my words and my actions, and the effects or consequences of those words and actions, then what essentially would have happened here is that I would have been reduced to mere background noise. Is that making sense? So if my actions and my words have no ultimate meaning, if they're just, random events in a meaningless universe, then I don't have any meaning. And part of why the world is in the state it is in today is because each and every one of us has such significance to God that He will not eliminate the effects or the effects of our causes. Is that making sense? You with me? It's a little complex here, but I think we need to get hold of that. God sees you as too much of an image bearer, someone bearing the image of God. God sees you as too significant to say that what you do doesn't matter. What you do matters. What you say matters. Your actions have consequences. That's not God being mean. It's not God saying, okay, you're going to get what's coming to you. You chose to do this, and this is what's going to happen. It's not that at all. It's God saying that you have the image of God stamped upon you, and what you do has a long-lasting impact on the universe. And I will not eradicate that, because that would be to eradicate you. Does that help a little bit? Now, the historical context here in Jesus' day, the religious leaders had the action of making God so remote that the consequence was that the people didn't see any real connection with God and with the religious activity they were doing. So they were coming to the temple, they were doing what they were told to do, but their main purpose, the religious leaders that came to talk to Jesus, the main purpose of the general masses was to support the system. They were there to pay their tithes, to bring their sacrifices, to do what was expected so that the religious elite could remain comfortably ensconced in their wealthy positions. He's following? So with that going on, they weren't really opposed to God doing, the religious leaders weren't really opposed to God doing something in the world necessarily, as long as he did it in a way that was under their jurisdiction. Do you see the absurdity of it here? God could do whatever he wanted as long as it propped up their positions of power and comfort. Now, John the Baptist had created some real disharmony in their ranks, because John the Baptist had become hugely popular among the people. John the Baptist had come with this idea of God not only as someone out there remote and irrelevant to everything, but as someone that we have a personal moral responsibility to. John the Baptist had come teaching personal moral responsibility, teaching a level of holiness that the people really hadn't been inclined to address before. And the worst thing of it is the people were responding to this. Now, they knew in their thinking that this just might be an act of God here, because this tremendous revival, people are turning to God, people are turning from their sins to live holy lives. It actually might be something that God was doing. But then the higher grid or standard had to attain was, but wait a minute, that would disrupt things the way we've set them up. So you're still following. So John the Baptist was seen as a real problem because he was popular and because he was offering a religious concept that was different than the product they were giving. They didn't like something they couldn't control. So when John the Baptist was beheaded, they breathed a sigh of collective relief. At least that's out of the way now. But Jesus didn't go away. And now they've got Jesus to deal with. And Jesus comes along and he's teaching the same high level of holiness, the same high level of personal moral responsibility that John was. And there's this nagging sense that something really is going on around Jesus, something supernatural is happening. And so that's troublesome because that's even harder to control. And the real objective here, as the religious leaders, was to control. Jesus has come just the day before into the temple and really messed things up. They had this beautiful system set up where people would come in and bring their money for their tithes. But it was money with pagan images on it, so it couldn't be used in the temple. So they had a service for helping the people that for a fee, for a generous fee, you could take the money that you brought, which was pagan money, and have it changed into temple money and put in the coffers of the temple. And they gouged the people hugely. Another problem that was going on is that in the part of the temple that had been designed for Gentiles, you follow me, designed for those who weren't yet followers of God, in that part of the temple, they set up this marketplace. So if you didn't have the right kind of lamb, or if your lamb had a spot of dirt on its left toe, then you would have to trade that in for one of their lambs, which they would gladly exchange to you for a fee. And so they were making tremendous amounts of money through exploiting the people, and they were taking the place of prayer and making it a marketplace. Jesus had objected strongly to this because they were putting barriers between the people and God. And he took a whip and drove them out. That had happened the day before. So now here's Jesus back in the temple, and the people were flocking to him. He's teaching them, which was like their job, and he is driving out the marketplace, and they're wondering, Jesus, what in the world do you think you're doing? Who gave you the right to come in here and disrupt this religious system, this religious institutionalism that we've worked so hard to establish? Who do you think you are, turning everything upside down? Where do you get your authority? Now, Jesus is brilliant. I mean, it's like he's brilliant because he's Jesus, but then, wow, this is really brilliant. Jesus answers their question by asking a question that answers their question. Did you see what he said there? Yeah, sure, I'll give you the answer you want, but just tell me, John the Baptist's authority. Well, remember we talked about that. They kind of know John the Baptist might have God backing him up, but that makes them look bad. So they don't want to say that. But then if they say, no, he's not from God, well, then the people are going to object. And so they get in this conundrum where they don't know how to answer, and they say, well, we don't know. Which, of course, they did have an opinion on it, and they weren't being honest. They took the coward's way out and chose the way of non-commitment and said, we don't know. I was watching, Rebecca and I were watching, kind of flipping through Facebook, and there was a video on there of it's this guy that goes around and says, what would you do? And he sets up scenarios and films them, and then you see whether people would make the right choice or not. And the scenario was this. They had a professional actor who has Down syndrome, and maybe some of you have seen it, and he was acting as a checker in a grocery store, as a bagger, as a bagger, putting things in bags. And then they had another professional actor who came and was giving him a hard time. And they were trying to see what the people on the line would do. And so he's there, and the actor who's coming up says, isn't it just terrible they have these retards here, and they just hold things up, and I don't know why they have to do that. And now this is an actor to an actor, but they're filming it. And what was interesting was not that there were a few people who just really spoke up and said this is wrong to do. But what was interesting is that most people just kind of, looked down or looked away and were non-committal. So before I can condemn the religious leaders for their fear of taking a stand, I have to be alerted that this is something that any of us can find a little bit too easy to do. They were non-committal when they really actually did know exactly what they thought. And so in a second act of pure genius, Jesus nails them with the parable. 2 sons, 2 responses, 2 behaviors. The son who's initially outwardly rejecting the father's authority is understood to represent the tax collectors and the prostitutes. Because in the end, though they'd started out wrong, they'd come around and actually done what the Father wanted them to do. They had repented. They'd entered into the kingdom. Whereas the son who says right off the bat, sure, I'll be glad to do whatever you want. You know me, you can always count on me. And then when it came right down to it, didn't do anything. And Jesus pulls it down to this and saying, in the end, it's not just your words. And it's not really even just your intentions, but is your actions that most clearly reveal who's in charge of your life. Our actions have effects. Our actions have consequences. We are image bearers, and what we do matters. So a very good question to let this parable, this passage ask of us is, when I look at my life, or maybe better, when someone else looks at my life, who would they say I'm living it for? Amen.